Hello everyone, it's Sonia and happy Tuesday or whatever day you're listening to this. So I was doing an exercise unrelated to this particular topic in regards to my clients and the people I work with. And I was trying to see what the similarity was, if there was a through line. And one of the things that I found was that every person I work with is highly driven. They're usually driven by some mission, or they're highly driven by some desire for greatness, for them to be great or to do something great. So if you happen to be one of my clients, you'll recognize that in you. And so it made me think a little deeper about what makes a person driven, or what do driven people do differently? Are we able to become more driven if we want to be? Is that something that we can actually activate? And the answer is yes. There's a couple of different things that happen both physically and also mentally that can actually contribute to a person being more driven. So first off, some of the things that driven people typically do is, one, they have a plan. They're pretty plan oriented. They have a bigger vision. They know where they're going, and there's some flexibility to it. It's not rigid. They can pivot if they need to, but there is a plan in place. And within that plan, there are goals, very goal driven. And we're going to learn why that's really important. So they have goals, they follow them, and then they make new ones. And the sky's kind of the limit in terms of where those goals can be. The bar is really high, and there's a level of excitement in terms of going for something that's just a little bit perhaps out of the comfort zone. And another thing is they will get help if they need it. They're not afraid to ask for help. There's not necessarily this feeling of I have to know everything. They're perfectly happy to learn and grow from somebody else who might know how to do it better. It narrows the learning curve and gets them to great even faster. Another thing is growth mindset, or really being driven to learn and know, because the more they know, knowledge is power. The more they can implement and the further they can go and the faster they can go. And in fact, there was a Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, and also Tony Robbins. I remember him saying that in a seminar that I did, are voracious readers. And Gates and Buffett had said if they could have a superpower, their one superpower would be to be able to read faster. And I know Tony Robbins, very early on in his career, learned how to speed read and reads an enormous amount of books. So any form of learning, whether that comes in a book or online or podcasts or whatever it is, any kind of growth also helps the mission and keeps them more driven. They also move on. They don't obsess over the things that went wrong and keep repeating those things over and over and over. If something goes wrong, if they fail, if it wasn't the right choice, they move and continue forward. So those are some of the characteristics that are definitely prevalent in driven people. On a kind of more personal note too, they will also eat healthier, typically, exercise, and usually get up a little earlier too. The early bird catches the worm. But here is another really interesting and notable fact about driven people, is that they have higher dopamine levels. In fact, dopamine is that chemical. People always think about it as one of the feel-good chemicals, but it's deeply connected to the reward center of the brain. In fact, some scientists will say dopamine is the bridge between psychological distance, sort of the distance between where you are and that place that you want to go, that place where you're sitting on the couch debating whether to exercise and you actually doing it. And people with higher dopamine levels typically are more likely to go do things. They're more driven. But there's a caveat. It's not just the quantity of dopamine, but it's also where it goes, the pathway that it takes in your head. If dopamine goes to the more prefrontal cortex, that reward center, that motivation center, it will absolutely heighten your drive and your ability to get some things done. But what they've also noticed is that sometimes in a study, in fact, that was done at Vanderbilt College, they studied one group of go-getters and one group of slackers. And they both did have increased dopamine levels, but the go-getters had it going into that prefrontal cortex, that reward center of the brain. And the slackers had it going more into the lower part of your brain that's connected more deeply to emotion and risk. And still the more driven go-getters still had higher levels, but it was also where it showed up in your brain. And that is because essentially we're addicted to dopamine. Dopamine is the that thing that will get you off, that thing that shows you that this is important enough to go do. The reward is great enough for you to actually get yourself up and take action. And so we're essentially, driven people are fairly addicted to rewards and that dopamine hit. We're all addicted to dopamine to some extent, but people with higher levels are more addicted to it. So the question is then, do you just need more dopamine, and can you create more dopamine? And the answer is yes, in fact, you can. And some of those ways are very associated with what we noticed about the driven people is, one is to set goals, and very manageable goals. Because once again, it's about achieving it. It's about triggering that reward center. So if you do something and you accomplish it, that sets off like ding, 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 we've done something good. And again, why it's also super important to celebrate it. So set small, doable, manageable goals and celebrate it. It doesn't have to be some expensive gift or anything else. It really can just be that psychological celebration where you like pat yourself on the back, or you jump up and down, or you do something that tells your body, this was a great thing. I moved closer to where I really want to go. There are some other things that you can do. Anything that will trigger dopamine. Gratitude is also that benefit finding good things in what you see around you, in yourself, and what's happening. That will elicit more dopamine. Eating more protein, interestingly, of both animal and vegetarian, that could be soy or legumes, or it doesn't have to, or eggs or meat or fish, actually triggers this L-tyrosine, which is a basically precursor to a dopamine release, and it comes in protein. So increasing some protein can also help have a sort of a greater dopamine effect. Lowering sugar. Sugar actually gets in the way of a dopamine release. So lowering your sugar intake, also the same with saturated fats, can interrupt that dopamine release. People who have a lot of that typically have lower levels of dopamine. Exercise. Exercise generates a lot of different chemicals, but dopamine does happen to be one of them. And so you can add that to the list of good things to do. And getting sleep will also help you increase your dopamine. So there you have it. If you want to be more driven, we want to up the levels of dopamine and sort of redirect it, if you will, to the front part of your brain, or that reward center. And part of how you do that is to make plans, set goals, move on from things, don't dwell in the bad, don't sweat the small stuff, and get up if you fall down. Continuously grow, because that's also a sign of driven people. and take care of yourself. Really be good to yourself, both physically in terms of what you're eating, your diet, and sleep and exercise. So, on that note, I encourage you to go out, accomplish something great, and shine.